Memory Transcription Subject, SLANIC, Venlol Space Corps. Date, Standardized Human Time, September 23, 2136. Thanks to the destruction of Gojid military outposts, human forces were able to waltz through their systems without challenge. Pyre recalled all vessels to protect their cradle world, which meant the attack on Earth was postponed. With their border detection systems and complex defense network offline, their only play was to hold their core planets. The rambunctious behavior of the humans, on the transport ride to the Gojid homeworld, struck me as odd. Their vulgarity multiplied by an exponential factor. Once we were among the regular soldiers, the outpost visitors never made such explicit or demeaning comments. Even Marcel made some quips to his counterparts that came across as downright cruel, but they just laughed it off. I was beginning to realize that these predators may have toned themselves down, so as not to exacerbate our fears. How can they mess around at a time like this? Don't they know what they're walking into? My human was playing some game with his new friend, Tyler, which was difficult for me to spectate. As I observed, my buddy's on-screen avatar shot an enemy, while gunfire sound effects blared from the speakers. Marcel's laser-focused expression became gleeful, and his counterpart cursed. The screen shifted to a replay, which showed the bullet penetrating the avatar's head from a side angle. The body dropped in slow motion, as though the game was glamorizing its demise. Why would the Terrans want to simulate murder and warfare, for fun? I hated seeing my friend conduct himself in a predatory manner. It was disconcerting, to say the least. Come to think of it, the ruckus the predators were creating caused me discomfort, in general. I really wanted a hug, and for them to turn off that uncivilized game. However, I didn't want to embarrass my Terran friend by collapsing into his grip. That would put him in an uncomfortable position. According to my recent reading, human males were taught not to display emotion in public. Marcel grinned as Tyler called him obscenities, and my ears drooped against my head. I was hyper-aware that I was the only Venlol on this ship. I felt neglected and alone in this awful cage. We're less than an hour away from our destination, SLANIC. You need to get yourself together. I slipped away while the red-haired human was distracted, and locked myself into the lavatory. My snuffling echoed through the chamber, as full-throated sobs racked my body. Why couldn't I just be happy that my friend was improving? It was idiotic to think that Marcel needed me. There were too many rowdy predators here, and I was just going to get in the way. Whatever bonding had occurred between us, my species was too emotional and sensitive. I could never be one of his kind. It was more enjoyable for him to hang with his own people. Maybe my human was bored of me, now that the alien novelty had worn off. Had I been suffocating the redhead, when I shepherded his recovery? My sentimentality must be grating on his nerves. All we were to the Terrans was a burden. They had to be gentle with Venlol, and couldn't be their true selves. SLANIC. A rapping sound emanated on the frame, and Marcel's agitated voice trickled into my ears. Surprise tingled in my chest that he even noticed my departure. SLANIC, open the door. Go away, I growled. Regret pulsed through my mind, instantly, but it was too late to take the words back. I didn't want to hurt him, or push him away. What if this was what Sarah meant, when she warned me not to call him a monster? I needed to let him make new friends, if that was what helped his recovery, even if it meant replacing me. I can't do that. The human tugged at the sliding door, making the frame wobble. Don't make me kick this down, you big fluffer. I blinked away the tears, and tried to collect myself. My claws hooked on the locking mechanism, and began to unclasp it. Marcel pushed his way inside the second it opened, and knelt beside me. His hazel gaze softened when he looked at me. Judging by the irritation, my eyes were red and puffy. Are you okay? Did I do something wrong? He whispered. I shook my head. No. The video games bother you? You think it's senseless and violent. Predatory? Yeah. But that's not why I'm crying, at least, I don't think so. So you're homesick? Not really. Ah, don't worry about it. It's stupid. The human crossed his arms, and raised his eyebrows. The unwavering look he gave me stated, I'm not budging until you spill. A tear strayed down my cheek. You've been different ever since we got on this ship, Mark. I feel like you don't want me here. Marcel recoiled like he'd been slapped, and stared at me in silence. My heart sank, the soldier wasn't denying it. The human finally shook his head and chuckled, a stubborn grin clinging to his face. How could even a predator find that amusing? A snarl tugged at my lips. Don't laugh at me. I am going to laugh at you, when you say something that fucking dumb, he snorted. How is it dumb? It's like you've lost all interest in talking to me, or doing anything together. Slanek, you've been avoiding me with a 10-foot pole. You haven't so much as wagged your tail at me, and it's suddenly like any contact with me repulses you. So I've been keeping my distance, and trying to figure out what I did. Huh? Don't you want your personal space? I read a lot of books on human psychology to prep for this trip. They said you have an aversion to close contact. I didn't want to pester or embarrass you in front of the other guys. We have a problem with other humans in our bubble. But you? You're fine, because you're cute. Look, anyone that objects to me cuddling you is probably the type of person that kicks puppies for fun. So they can fuck right off. A chuckle trilled from my throat. All the predatory stressors compounded my emotions, and it hadn't even occurred to me that I was the one who withdrew. Marcel was only respecting what he saw as my wishes. I squinted at him. You're having more fun with the other humans, though. You look so happy, and I want you to be. I'm just trying to get to know the guys. We're going to be fighting alongside of them. I don't want everyone to treat me like some charity case, just because I'm, Marcel trailed off, pointing to his pink scars. That's all I'm known for, Slanek. I don't want that. That doesn't define you. Anyone who thinks it does can fuck right off, to use your phrase. You're right. I'm sorry if I made you feel excluded, buddy. I'm sorry too. All is forgiven. So, now that we're good, can I pick you up? As soon as he saw my ears flick, Marcel scooped me up in his arms. I felt joyful as he carried me to the couch, unashamed of our bond. The predator switched off the gaming console, noticing my sigh of relief. I wasn't sure I wanted to be in his grip while he was focused on simulated death. Come on, man. We had one more round, Tyler protested. I felt sorry for you. Mercy rule. Marcel scratched my forehead, and the other soldier smiled at me too. Somehow, the expression looked much more ferocious on his lips than my human's. Besides, our room was plunged into darkness, as the lights snapped out in unison. The transport lurched beneath my paws, and the long-limbed humans reached for nearby furniture to steady themselves. Gojid orbital defenses must have annealed us, which meant we entered their orbit. In the dim lighting, the predators' faces were cloaked in shadow. It bore a striking resemblance to our prehistoric beasts, lurking in the night. The only thing I could see was the faint glint of Marcel's eyes, and the rapid movement of his arms. He draped me over his shoulder, while terror numbed my mind. I could hardly even squirm in his firm grip, not that my body was obeying my brain's commands. I wanted to protest, but couldn't manage anything more than squeaks of gibberish. Slanek, don't pass out like you did against the Arxer. You're supposed to be watching out for Mark, I scolded myself. Do you have to freeze every time you're in imminent danger? How are you going to make it in a war zone? Another tremor pounded the transport, and the overhead ceiling creaked. The shields buzzed from the impact's dispersal, but some of the damage trickled through. This Gojid barrage meant an early departure for Terran soldiers launching to the surface. The main vessel wasn't going to be able to get us as close as they wanted. I'm surprised the Gojits found us so soon, Tyler barked. What about the ships we sent ahead as decoys? To draw their defenses away? I lowered my ears. I'm sure they predicted your predatory tactics. Ruses and deceit, that's all you guys. Marcel's fingers tightened around my stomach. You don't have to make it sound nefarious, Slanek. Everything we do isn't predator this, predator that. We just want a tactical advantage. Well, you're a predator, whether you like it or not. I don't mean it to be unkind, I responded. The Arxer are ambush predators too. We've been conditioned to expect them to use stealth, or lure us away. Tyler snorted. We're not ambush predators though. We're Percy. Shut the fuck up. I gaped as Marcel jabbed a heel into the other human's boot, and caused Tyler's words to break off. Don't you dare finish that sentence. Ow, shit. I'm sorry, man. I wasn't thinking. Wait, you're what? I asked in a tentative voice. Marcel, why did you stop him? You're scaring me, roaring like that. My eyes had adjusted to the lighting enough to see my human gritting his teeth. I had been around the Terrans long enough to know that was no smile. It was too strained. He was terrified that immediate disclosure would freak me out. What secret was Marcel hiding? Didn't humans have to be ambush predators, primarily? All of our scientists were certain that was their only viable hunting strategy. They were slow, and their brains were their only advantage. Do you trust me, Slanek? He whispered. I nuzzled his shoulder. Yes. Marcel turned into a hangar bay. Do you think I'm an abomination? Like Sovlin and Zarn did? No. You know I don't. Well, I'd like to keep it that way. I'll tell you, but not right now. Then, it can be our secret. Okay? Fine. But I'm not going to forget. My friend sighed, and scratched his fresh buzz cut with frustration. I could tell from how his strides quickened that he didn't want to convey that information at all. Something about this whole exchange unsettled me deep in my bones. Wouldn't any explanation of humanity's evolution be a good thing? In their position, I would want to put as many scientific questions to rest as I could. It would help galactic leaders make an informed decision about Terran society and inclinations. Marcel set me on the floor, and slipped a bulky harness over his shoulders. I scrutinized his body language, trying to determine why he wouldn't confide in me. If anything, not defaulting to ambush predation distanced humanity from the Arxer. What could be more heinous than stealth? Now, on the topic of trust, the red-haired human began. I'm going to strap you to my vest and sedate you. Everything will be all right, I promise. What? I scrambled backward, and collided tail first with Tyler. Why? You don't need to knock me out. Marcel cinched his vest straps. You know we're jumping out of a shuttle from the upper atmosphere. I don't think you want to be awake for that. What? No. I thought that was a joke. We don't joke about our crazy military shit, Tyler chuckled. My entire body quivered with dread, and my tail bunched up between my legs. Bile rose in my throat, a byproduct of the nausea racking my stomach. This was suicide. Nobody in their right mind, or even the Arxer, would choose to freefall from the clouds. Tree-dwelling predators like the humans should have some fear of heights, or at least of slipping to their deaths. Maybe that's what kind of predators they were. Leaping from great heights onto their prey? You won't remember any of it, Marcel insisted, creeping toward me. You'll just go to sleep, and you'll wake up on the ground. Leaving you here is not an option, okay? The Terran ship pitched to the side, as it was pounded by another enemy assault. The shields rendered a negligible difference this time, and the thunderous jolt made my molars rattle. I squeezed my eyes shut, and tried to think. My options were to go up in flames, or to enter a drug-induced state of helplessness, as a predator dragged me toward the ground. The only image in my mind was myself as a splat of blood on the pavement. What if the sedative wore off before our deaths, and my last moments were hurtling through purple skies at terminal velocity? I just couldn't do it, even for Marcel. I was going to tell the humans to leave me, and then figure out something else. As a Venlil, there was always the option for me to surrender myself. The Gojits would take me as a prisoner if I took a shuttle over there, alone. There was a prick in my neck, and I yelped at the unexpected pain. My eyes blinked open to see Marcel stooped beside me, inserting a needle into my skin. The human already unloaded the entire syringe. With the tranquilizers flowing through my veins, I was going to be at the predator's mercy. A scream of horror came from my throat. No! Please, don't! Mark! My eyelids felt impossibly heavy, and my vision shrank to a pinhole. The last thing I remembered was collapsing into the human's arms, certain he was about to kill us both. Memory transcription subject, Slanik, Venlil Space Corps. Date, Standardized Human Time, September 23, 2136. I stirred to an array of screams, chaotic and unhinged, the perishing squeals of prey falling at a predator's claws. My ears keyed into pounding paw steps on the grass. Those were unmistakable thumps of animals running around in terror. Bullet spurts were also a constant, cropping up from both scattered Terran friendlies and lucid Gojits. I'm alive, and I think I'm in one piece. Hooray! By the looks of it, the enemy were fleeing from a military base by the hundreds. It seemed to be a 50-50 split, which of the Gojits were fighting and which were on the run. All the sentries and watchtowers, set up to counter a previous Arxer siege, were useless against an aerial drop. It was embarrassingly easy for the Terran forces to take control of the military institution, and continue to expand their perimeter. There was no organized response like the humans expected from a predominant Federation power. No one accounted for predators falling from the sky, and landing smack dab in the middle of their fortresses. Many Gojid soldiers were in a panic, several had tossed their weapons aside, even as officers tried to restore order. A few individuals were lying prostrate on the ground. Others ran for seemingly unharmed ground vehicles, only to find the devious humans slash their tires. Anyone who fled to buildings for shelter was tracked by a Terran breach team. Predatory soldiers flushed their quarry out, adept in the art of clearing structures. Their arboreal roots only bolstered their mastery of ground warfare, there was no safe haven amidst their shocking incursion. The Gojids at least had a chance against the Arxer. They could shoot down their shuttles, scout for their traps, and prepare for their advances, I thought. This is something else. This degree of surprise factor will only work once. It was horrifying to look around at the enemy corpses littering the premises. Many were riddled with bullets, mowed down without remorse by the ravenous Terran troopers. The ghastly sights, of organs perforating skin and blood pooling from agonized soldiers, sickened me to the core. Predators were simply everywhere, corralling their prey to perfection. Was this really what humans practiced throughout their history? Was that disposition hardwired into their DNA? Slanik, you're awake. Tyler's voice came from behind me, making me jump. Take it easy, at least until the drugs wear off. We'll get you a pistol when you're more alert. Panic seized at my heart. Where is Marcel? Over there, he replied, pointing. Marcel was laying on his side with a communicator pressed to his face. A scoped rifle was tucked under his armpit, poised to pick off any Gojids attempting to return to the battle. The human found a group of enemy soldiers assembling out of his range, and watched with unblinking eyes. He barked out coordinates in a throaty snarl. A small aircraft, which didn't seem large enough to fit a pilot, descended over the enemy gathering. Its dimensions were minuscule enough to evade Gojid air defenses. I assumed it was some sort of Terran murder robot. Sure enough, kinetic fire rained down with incessant whirring, followed by a succinct missile explosion. Smoke accumulated in the air, as body parts, guts, and earth were dispelled from the epicenter. The humans didn't want the enemy to have time to form ranks or generate a plan. "This is their military?" Marcel muttered. When we landed and their fellow soldiers started to be taken out around them, there was just mass panic. "I don't understand." "You're seeing true fear. Everything becomes a free-for-all, and you lose your sense of self," I growled. "Forget reason, or thought, you're just drowning." The concept of a stampede was intuitive as blinking or breathing, to any decent-sized herbivore. In situations where bizarre and unanticipated threats took hold, it was easy to sink into a mindless daze. Feeling surrounded, races of notable intelligence were reduced to a herd of primitive animals. Every instinct demands to run, but you don't know where to run to. One person races off in a direction, and pandemonium erupts. Everyone follows their lead, because they don't know what else to do. Individuals like me, with an inclination to freeze, often got trampled as collateral. When I joined the Venlil Space Corps, a good chunk of our training was dedicated to overriding our flighty instincts. Virtual reality simulations of the Arxer, closing in on all sides, were common. A commander couldn't manage a total breakdown of military order, with soldiers fleeing the battlefield in droves. The predators startling the young Gojid conscripts, and simultaneously closing off escape routes, set up the perfect scenario for a stampede. Honestly, that was where large herbivores were at their most dangerous. Raw instinct could encourage groups to plow through the threat. Humans concentrated fire on any Gojid clusters charging, causing them to turn away. "I hope you can forgive me for dragging you out a spacecraft, against your will." Marcel pursed his lips. "It wasn't my first choice." "I'm glad you're not hurt." My ears laid back against my head, unsettled by the notion. That would have been awful, to wake up and find that out. "Ah," Tyler purred, with a monstrous grin. "The Venlil are really sweet, aren't they? I kind of want one." "Don't phrase it like that. Venlil are good companions, but they're not something you fucking own," my predator growled. Despite their chatter, neither of the humans' eyes left the battlefield. A group of Gojid soldiers were hiding behind a large tree, a few hundred paces away. These hostiles retained their wits enough to shoot at any Terrans in the vicinity. Stray rounds impacted the hillock, whiskers shy of our position, and forced the predators to hunker down. Marcel's breathing hitched, and his gun barrel swiveled in slight increments. Calling in the coordinates would waste precious seconds. The primate thought he could take the shot himself. One finger crept over the trigger, as a hint of a smirk tugged at his face. Was my friend enjoying this skirmish? Perhaps as much as those video games? There is another side to him, to all of humanity, that I didn't appreciate. I'd be curious if we ran those famed brain experiments, right now. Their aggression is concerning. They look hungry. Tyler followed his partner's lead, pressing his chin into the dirt. The blonde-haired male lined up his own shot, and the two humans synced their motions. Ever the cooperative pack predators, they placed a pair of bullets through their targets' heads in quick succession. I recoiled in disgust as I saw how pleased the Terrans were with themselves. There shouldn't be anything enjoyable about murder. Base air defenses are disabled and under UN control. Unit 13, proceed into the Gojid merchant settlement. We expect hostile reinforcements by nightfall. A male voice on the other end of the radio crackled to life. Commence occupation of the city, and establish a base of operations when the area is secure. Be advised civilians are fleeing en masse. My jaw almost dropped to the dirt. Why was the Terran commander advising his troops of the civilians fleeing? So they could pick them off or intercept them? Those were families vacating their homes with tiny children, terrified people who didn't want to end up as a predator's evening supper. Slanek, the CO said that so we use discretion which targets we shoot. It's difficult to tell a fleeing civilian from an army coward right now. Marcel grunted, without even turning his head. Sometimes, I wonder what you think we are. The only civilians we want are political figures. I blinked in confusion. Did I say that out loud? I was certain I hadn't. It was almost like the human could read my mind. My thoughts must be quite transparent. Most likely, the unnerved emotions had showed on my face. This warfare business left me shaken up, since it showcased the ruthless predator in them all. Why are you invading the settlement then? I stammered. Seizing this particular city will disrupt their supply chain. Forcing a surrender is what we want, without a long-term conflict. We can't occupy every square inch of the planet. We have to be selective with our targets. The two humans dusted themselves off, and crawled back down the grassy knoll. My heartbeat raced as we packed in with the rest of their unit. Many dilated eyes turned toward me with interest. In stark contrast to the vessels I served on, there was not a single soldier panicking or crying. There was an unnatural amount of composure and structure. My mind wandered as we exited the north gate, trundling toward the walled settlement. Ground vehicles, which my human explained had been airdropped as well, served as an armored method to clear the path. It was a short ride to the city outskirts. There was so much carnage, I saw a handful of Terrans dragging an enemy away with a bag over their head. What are you doing with the surrendering Gojids? And the wounded ones? I blurted. You see the people with the Red Cross band on their sleeves? Those are medics, Tyler explained. If you get hurt by those spiky freaks, God forbid, go see them. Marcel sighed. Anyone who surrenders is being held as a prisoner. We're treating any human and Gojid soldiers still alive. Our procession rolled to an unforeseen halt. Tree branches, barricades, and spike strips were laid out in a desperate attempt to obstruct the road. The Terrans disembarked their vehicles, and Marcel propped my paws around his neck to spare me from walking. My stomach lurched as I got a glimpse inside the settlement. There were two routes out of the city, according to the maps Venlil intelligence provided. The main gate was large enough to fit 3 vehicles side by side. With tens of thousands of people trying to evacuate, it turned into a bottleneck. Civilian corpses were splayed by the gates, and others were beaten badly enough to be immobilized. Many of the bodies were children, with skulls cracked open and limbs shattered to pieces. Half-conscious individuals staggered or crawled away from the approaching soldiers. They were fish in a barrel, as the Terrans say. Did the predators do this? Was Marcel lying about his commander's intent? I realized as we drew closer that several of the cuts looked like claw marks, and that paw prints were stamped into the blood pools. This was the aftermath of a citywide stampede, not a predatory massacre. The inhabitants' desperation to escape, before the predators' arrival, was something I could only imagine. The humans, to their credit, didn't seem jubilant about the civilian casualties. Holy shit, Tyler breathed. Marcel lowered his rifle. What kind of parent leaves their child behind, Slanek? To bleed out in the streets. I bowed my head in shame. I thought you guys did that for a second. I'm sorry. My human ignored me with a huff, and marched over to one of the Gojid children. She was crying for her mother, while tears poured down her face. Her leg was pulverized from prolonged trampling, and cuts laced across her body. Marcel knelt beside the kid, removing his helmet with slow motions. Hi, sweetie. I'm Marcel. What's your name? Don't eat me. Help. Mommy, she sobbed. Nobody is going to hurt you. The human removed a Venlil plushie with oversized features from his duffel bag. He handed it to the child, a patient look in his eyes. What's your name? I wasn't even going to ask why the primate was carrying that toy on his person. The Gojid toddler eyed it with suspicion, before hugging the soft fluff against her body. My presence, riding on the scary predator's back, might serve as a soothing factor as well. Nulia, she said with a sniffle. My mom says you're bad people. That's a pretty name, Nulia. Parents are wrong about lots of things, Marcel replied. Nulia whined in pain. Where did you get those scars, Mazel? You look mean. One of your officers tortured him because he looked scary, I growled. Marcel has some nerve, to be born with forward-facing eyes. They threw him in a cage, electrocuted him, and... Slanek. She's a child. The human drew an inhaler from his pack and passed it to Nulia. Breathe this. It'll help with the pain. You were hurt just because your eyes are ugly? She suckled on the canister, surveying the predator with earnestness. That doesn't seem fair. Marcel blinked, a far-off look in his gaze. It's not fair at all. Humans just want your leaders not to kill us. We're here to stop them from destroying our homes and our loved ones. Other humans were tending to down civilians as well, scrambling to set up a temporary medical tent. There was the side of the predators I was fond of, the empathetic nurturers. That wasn't the typical flavor of an Arxer siege. No rogue soldiers were attempting to sample Gojid flesh, or salivating at the blood. With the Greys, the cost of surrender was always higher than fighting on. No matter how steep the penalties. If they saw Terran mercy, the Gojidi Union might be willing to admit defeat. The actual evidence suggested these predators were civilized, with rules and boundaries. So, if you don't want to eat me, can you fix my leg? Nulia asked. My friend's gaze lit up. Yeah. We'll try to find your parents after. The humans had no motive to help, yet their trained killers were falling over themselves to render life-saving aid. It was striking how their instinct led them to prioritize and coddle the children. If it was like this across the globe, the Terran civilian policy would worm its way into the local broadcasts. Wouldn't it be ironic if the tide of public opinion began to shift? Captain Sovlin must be having a coronary right about now. Memory transcription subject, Slanek, Venlil Space Corps. Date, Standardized Human Time, September 27, 2136. Waves of Gojid reinforcements arrived after the Predator's initial takeover. The human strategic advantage was that they could be liberal when hurling artillery into enemy ranks. Our opponents were more hesitant, bearing the knowledge that civilians were trapped within city limits. To their credit, the Gojids adapted to the novel predatory tactics quickly. To counteract the unmanned UN ships, the fresh troops carried out manual surface-to-air missile launches. That made precision strikes a more challenging affair. From what I heard, most Gojid politicians escaped to an unknown bunker location, which meant the Terrans were also thwarted on their main objective. The humans resolved to hold their perimeter, exacting a heavy price in blood for every inch they were forced to concede. They took up guard at positions with open sightlines, and made Gojid advances suicide. With neither side able to make progress, the situation became a standoff. Our rivals must be steaming at their failure to reclaim any significant landmarks. Slanek, you need to eat something. You haven't touched your plate. We're on next watch, Tyler mumbled through a mouthful of food. The blonde human was shoveling brown crumbles down his gullet, one after the other. This person, that I knew and traveled with, was consuming meat. Real, actual flesh bits, like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. No wonder Marcel had taken Nulia away for mealtime, and told me I should eat alone. I didn't want to be impolite when Tyler asked if I wanted company. The thought hadn't even crossed my mind, that he would indulge in such a savage feast. My appetite vanished as soon as I saw him bite into those rations. There were so many animal pieces, contaminating the entire meal. The queasiness in my stomach was swelling upward, like a thrashing wave at high tide. He's eating the burnt skin and muscle of a dead animal, crunching it between his fangs. Fucking hell, I cursed internally. This predator is swallowing those carcass shavings without hesitation. He's enjoying it, even. Acid gurgled in my throat, and I spewed my stomach contents onto the ground. The human's blue eyes widened in alarm, and he rushed to my side. The flesh-eating beast patted my back, whispering soothing words. He dabbed a towel against my mouth, wiping off the vomit specks. "It's okay, buddy," Tyler hummed. "I didn't realize you were sick." How could this predator try to emulate normal behavior, after what he just did? All I could think was that he was a disgusting animal, and that he was probably breathing flesh particles onto my neck. It was all I could do not to kick my hind legs into his carnivorous stomach. I tried to spit the taste of puke out of my mouth. "I want you to leave." Yeah, alright. Let me get Marcel first, and he can check on you." I breathed a sigh of relief as the human exited the tent, and tried not to look at the meal remains he left behind. Most of these predators here ate meat, didn't they? It was a standard part of their diet. Marcel was the rare exception that refrained from such horrid consumption. I couldn't have the vegetarian back at my side fast enough. My human returned with a sleeping Nulia tucked against his chest. The Gojid child had her leg fixed in a cast, and seemed to be in better spirits after a few days. Remarkably, her spines were laying flat on her back, despite being in a predator's clutches. Marcel rubbed the bristles, careless to the fact that they could extend and prickle him at any moment. "Mark," I whined. "Please." His hazel eyes landed on the table. "What the fuck, man? You brought predator food around Slanek?" Tyler glanced at his plate. "Oh, that's why he threw up? Shit, I'm sorry." "Slanek, I'm real sorry, bro." "Get the fuck out of here," Marcel growled. "And for God's sake, take your shit-ass Emery with you." The other human grabbed his food, and rushed away as my friend shot him a blistering glare. The redhead cupped a hand over Nulia's eyes as she stirred, so she wouldn't see what Tyler had been munching on. I don't think I was ever going to be able to look at that meat-eating predator the same. That savage display made my skin crawl. I lowered my ears. "I'm sorry for making you yell at your friend." "Shoo, it's okay, Slanek. Let's go outside and get some fresh air," Marcel said. "You'll feel better. Then, we'll clean up that mess. Everything is going to be fine." My mind began to settle once we wandered out beneath the starlight. The red-haired human tickled Nulia's nose, making her giggle. It was clear he took a shine to the Gojid child, despite the feelings he harbored toward Sovlin and her species as a whole. I didn't understand how his brain operated sometimes. "If you're happy and you know it, clap your paws," the human sang in a low voice, shooting a glance toward me. The kid squealed and slapped him on the chest, which I don't think was the instruction. "If you're happy." Two bright orange flashes detonated on the horizon, striking the most populated regions of the settlement. Marcel's song died out as he observed the explosions, and my own eyes widened with horror. I thought the Terrans were opposed to an orbital bombardment. Why had these predators gone through the trouble of an invasion, just to do that? Were they lashing out because they failed to capture their desired political targets? More bombs fell close behind, striking points across the skyline, with the undeniable intention of scoring casualties. Aircraft ripped through the sky, dispersing a trail of interceptors to avoid being shot down. They were searching for a flat stretch of land on the city outskirts. Most likely, they wanted to touch down a shuttle and dispatch ground troops. The humans don't have aircraft like that, and they didn't land like that. Which means, all Terran forces, report to your extraction point. The UN fleet is engaging Arxer hostiles above world. Terse orders carried over the radio, confirming my worst suspicions. But they have already attained orbital supremacy. Their intent appears to be glassing the planet. Any sign of weakness was the Arxer's invitation to pounce. The sadistic predators must have sensed that something was off from the destruction of the Gojid border outposts. As they advanced to the core systems, the lack of resistance from patrol ships or FTL disruptors confirmed those suspicions. The Terran incursion left this system vulnerable to the true threat. Fear coursed through my veins, and the nausea began to simmer again. Facing the Greys after this miserable, irredeemable week was a dreadful thought. I felt like I was about to snap as things were. Meanwhile, the UN soldiers in the camp grabbed their weapons. They held no such reservations about drawing reptilian blood. I suspected fighting the Arxer was the reason most humans joined the Terran reserves. Not good. We have to evacuate as many people as we can, my human grumbled. But, I'm just going to get you two out of here. You're all that matters to me. Marcel withdrew his hand as Nulia's spines bristled, but didn't seem angered by the blood spots dotting his palm. He balanced the Gojid child in his arms, and knelt to let me climb onto his back. The weight proved difficult for him to handle. The predator grunted with exertion, shuffling forward in slow steps. The child's life comes first, obviously. We can't abandon her to a predator's whims like her mother did. Mark doesn't want to leave either of us behind, but it's too much. I disembarked. It was uncertain whether I could run more than a few minutes, or keep up with a human's long strides. But Nulia had no hope. If left to her own devices, with her maimed leg, she couldn't walk on her own. Marcel knelt back down. Slanek, no. I am not going anywhere without you. Listen. I can handle this. Take the kid. I'll be fine, I managed. My slender legs trotted after the departing Terran soldiers, trusting that I could follow their footsteps. Two hands grabbed me from behind, and I yelped in alarm. My head snapped around, teeth bared with the intention to bite my assailant. There was a moment of hesitation as I realized it was Tyler, the very human Marcel just chased out of my tent. A shudder rippled down my spine. The last thing I wanted was for this flesh-eater to stick his grubby paws on me. But it seemed to be the best solution for Marcel's sake, so I decided to tolerate the unwanted contact. My friend hesitated, seeing me squirm in discomfort. You've got Slanek, Ty. Yep. No man left behind. We all stick together, Tyler replied. The blonde predator shifted me onto his back, and he jogged off with Marcel close behind. The human's breathing grew a bit more laborious, although I'd hardly call it panting. The predators ran for minutes without carving a dent into their stamina. There were merely a few beads of sweat on Tyler's neck. That was odd. UN soldiers fanned out at the front of the entourage, on the lookout for threats. They were shepherding the vulnerable individuals behind them, rather than an every man for himself mentality. Terran medics were evacuating any wounded or captives that could stand, including their own hobbled soldiers. They had their fair share of human injuries to grapple with. Some Gojid prisoners attempted to flee as soon as they were released. They appeared in decent shape, for having been in predatory custody. The humans made little attempt to stop them, watching them go with head shakes. The evacuation couldn't slow for fearful idiots unwilling to act in their own survival interest. A decent percentage heeded the Terran warning about the Arxer threat, falling into the pack. Perhaps they felt indebted to the predators, since many were civilians who would be dead without human intervention. It was unsurprising to see that Marcel wasn't the only one carrying an alien child. Mozzie. Nulia wailed. Where are we going? We're going somewhere safe, darling, Marcel panted, accepting the nickname. I think if I tried to call him that, his reaction would be quite different. I need you to be brave. Think of it as a great adventure. Nothing can happen to you when you're with me, okay? I watched my human from my perch on Tyler's back. There was nothing adventurous about fleeing from an orbital raid. It was possible that nobody would make it off-world alive. A bomb could land atop the group right now and disintegrate us. More Arxer craft descended through the atmosphere, eager to collect dazed survivors as slaves. Pummel the cities across the globe, fill a few transports with cattle, and then finish off the rest. This was a story I'd seen before. Why did so many of the Arxer shuttles get through, when ours couldn't? I whispered, more to myself than anything. Tyler sighed. We did take control of the Gojid defenses. And we haven't learned how to use them. My ears curled back, as an explosion rocked the city wall a kilometer away. I was relieved we had escaped the confines with such swiftness. A few minutes slower and we would be toast. The humans carved a path through the local orchards, which took up much of the land outside the settlement. Grain fields rested past rows of plump trees, and I figured Terran craft would crunch down atop the stalks. At least we can land ships now. The sooner we're off this forsaken world, the better, I thought. I can't imagine how the Gojids feel, knowing their homeworld is all but lost. The Terrans must look friendly by comparison. Agitated chatter spawned at the head of the pack, and the humans slowed their pace. My gaze locked onto the galaxy's apex predators, who were spread out in search of lone civilians. I had never seen one of the Arxer in person. It was merciful that we spotted them first, but they still stood between us and our presumed extraction point. Their tough gray skin was taut and scaly, forming ridges along their spines. Their long V-shaped snouts were perfect for snapping up prey, serrated fangs jutted from their mouths, even when they were closed. Onyx eyes were dialed to slits, and tracked prey with jittery motions. Their bipedal plodding allowed them to lunge forward with unbelievable speed. My eyes zeroed in on an Arxer soldier, tearing into an elderly Gojid's stomach. The poor guy was still alive, and his screams were audible from here. Younger specimen were being dragged away, to serve breeding purposes or toil as slaves. Monsters, Nulia cried. Way scarier than Mausel. I want to go home. Marcel covered her eyes. Don't look, Nulia. We have to escape from the monsters. They destroyed your home. Fix it, she sobbed. Fix it now. I can't. I wish I could. The Terran soldiers leading the posse crept forward, and waved for the group to continue. The Arxer's nostrils flared as we drew within scent range. Something flashed in their eyes as they locked onto the humans. Was that interest? Did they recognize the puny primates as predators? UN forces opened fire on the Greys, and tried to seek refuge behind the orchard trees. They were drawing the reptilians' attention to provide cover for our escape. We darted out into the open, and I prayed that the vessels circling overhead were friendlies. As if on cue, 3 ships with the Terran insignia alighted on the grain field. Our human protectors were locked in a vicious firefight, at the edge of my periphery. A few of them were strewn out in lifeless positions. The time they bought us was a mere 30 seconds, we needed to be off the ground as soon as possible. The Arxer had wizened up to the diversion, and lobbed their shots at the civilian entourage. It is times like these I wish I had the humans' narrow field of vision. I can see all of the terror and death happening around us at once. Tyler pushed himself to his maximum speed, and dove into the open side door of a transport. I dropped to the floor and crawled toward the rear of the aircraft. The blonde human asked if I was okay, repeating my name several times, but I ignored him. My gaze was focused on the entrance, watching as several passengers climbed in. Dozens of people pushed into the craft, packing in on each other. The Gojids were eyeing any boarding predators warily, but after what they saw outside, they realized the humans had better self-control. Wait, where was my friend? The engine revved to life, and I screamed at the pilots to stop. Oblivious to any inherent danger, I raced toward a window. Marcel was shouldering a wounded human alongside a medic, while still clinging to the kid. Bullets sailed around him, but he refused to abandon his compatriot. He hoisted the half-conscious predator into the vehicle, then staggered on board with the doctor. My human collapsed on the floor, groaning. The expression on his face spoke of pain, and I hoped it was just exhaustion. I dashed to his side, and whimpered at the sight of crimson blood pooling around him. "Mazel, your arm is wet," Nulia said. "And sticky." "Is it now?" he murmured. "Don't worry about it. I'm sure it's fine." There was another red mark on his thigh. My predator appeared to have been shot twice during the fray. Why did Marcel insist on playing the hero every time the Arxer turned up? These wounds hit non-vital areas at least, from what I knew about human anatomy. As long as the bleeding was stopped, he should survive. The spacecraft began to lift off, and I shouted for a medic. The Terrans' efforts were undeniable, but the Gojid populace numbered a few billion. If even 100,000 made it off-world miraculously, it was simple math to figure the astronomical casualties. A great Federation power was down to a few colonies, and an endangered species overnight. Perhaps most concerning, the Arxer knew there was another predator now. My eyes floated back to the window, watching the gray beasts shrink to the size of insects. I suspected tracking down the Earthlings just became their top priority.